advisor and Saudi Crown Prince discuss latest peace efforts in Yemen. China's diplomatic breakthrough in the region could broker peace in Yemen. Houthis launch summer camps amid warnings of international and local human rights groups. Welcome to Yemen Today TV. This is the English news with me, Shazad Bilbay. U.S. National Security Advisor discussed efforts to end Yemen's 8-year war in a meeting with Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, according to the White House. The meeting Sunday night in Saudi Arabia came in a tense period for U.S.-Saudi ties, marred by disputes over human rights issues and oil production. This report has more details.
During a visit to Saudi Arabia on Sunday, U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan visited Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and discussed what the White House called significant progress in Yemen peace efforts. On a trip aimed at repairing strained ties with Riyadh, Sullivan met with the Crown Prince and UAE's and India's national security advisors to advance their shared vision of a more secure and prosperous Middle East region, interconnected with India and the world. Sullivan's meeting came after a period in which U.S.-Saudi ties have been damaged by oil production cuts by Saudi-led OPEC Plus and differences over the 2018 killing of Washington Post journalist Jamal Khashoggi. He reviewed significant progress in talks to further consolidate Yemen's now 15-month-long truce and welcomed ongoing UN-led efforts to bring the war to a close, as well as covering a range of other issues, according to a White House statement. The statement also said that Sullivan, President Joe Biden's top national security aide, praised the Crown Prince for Saudi assistance provided to U.S. individuals fleeing Sudan. Addressing the Washington Institute's 2023 SORF Symposium, Sullivan stated that the U.S. has long worked to enable diplomacy and de-escalation in Yemen.
None of us really thought that we could be on the brink of a sustained period of calm and a de-escalation of violence and an alleviation of the humanitarian suffering as we saw over the course of the next 14 months up until this period. And as I mentioned, we are in now the most sustained period of peace since the war began nearly a decade ago. Humanitarian aid and fuel are flowing through Yemen's ports. The civilian airport in Sana'a has reopened, and the parties are actively in discussions on a roadmap to ultimately bring this war to an end.
According to the State Department, U.S. Special Envoy Tim Lunder-King visited Oman and Saudi Arabia earlier this month to boost Yemen negotiations for peace. In 2015, a military coalition led by Saudi Arabia intervened in Yemen following the Houthi takeover of the country's capital Sana'a by Iran's allies. Tens of thousands of people have died and millions have gone hungry as a result of the conflict in Yemen, which is largely believed to be a proxy fight between Saudi Arabia and Iran.
China played a very important role on connecting the gap between Saudi Kingdom and Iran, who are key players in the Yemeni conflict. This report has more details.
China has a unique position as a potential peace broker in Yemen, since it has expanding relationship with key players in the conflict. To broker peace in Yemen, China would presumably need to concentrate efforts on working with the Saudis. The Chinese-backed rapprochement between Saudi Arabia and Iran could be a first step to this end. The agreement between Saudi Arabia and Iran talks about both sides' support for the non-interference in internal affairs of states and keenness to exert all efforts towards enhancing regional and international peace and security. And since that agreement was signed in March, there has been progress towards peace in Yemen. A Saudi delegation led by the kingdom's ambassador to Yemen held talks with Houthi leaders in Sana'a on April 9. The talks were the first direct negotiations between the two sides on the Yemeni soil since the war began in 2015. China could invest in reaching peace in Yemen, which would grant China economic benefits by providing access to the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, a key strategic channel on the Arabian Peninsula for commerce and trade, with an estimated 4% of global oil supply passing through it. Beijing could also invest in rebuilding a war-shattered Yemen and establishing a stable government. Adding to that, China could be seeking to be seen as a global peacemaker while the U.S. rule in the region is declining. Priorities in Washington have shifted to strategic concerns in East Asia and Ukraine, leading to a diplomatic opportunity to China to exploit. Meanwhile, U.S. relations with Saudi Arabia have cooled, in part due to the Yemeni war, and Washington has had no formal diplomatic relations with Iran for decades. As a neutral player, China can engage with Tehran and Riyadh in a way the U.S. simply cannot. That was evident in China's role in the rapprochement, and it could be the case in resolving Yemen's war.
The terrorist Houthi militia targeted 5 populated villages on the borders of Taiz and Hodeidah. Local sources reported that the Iran-backed Houthi militia launched intense shelling with shells.
أولاً أنا فيصل عبد صالح، أنا مسؤول مخيم الأمن المركزي في محافظة الضالع مديرية قاطبة. وبالنسبة لأم ناصر بعد وفاة ابنها ناصر وزوجها ناصر كان بالعمر 11 سنة وكان يعاني من مرض كثير في جسمه. مرض أولاً تكسرات بالدم، ثانياً وهو كان جسمه هزيل جداً. ناصر قد أصيب بمرض وهو الفتاك والقاتل الأخير هو مرض الكوليرا، وبعدها انتقل إلى المستشفى وتفوجئنا أنه قد توفي ناصر بمرض الكوليرا، يعني دون أن نقدر أن نعمل له حاجة.
The International Organization for Migration announced the displacement of 42 Yemeni families in the past week from many governorates. The IOM said the number of internally displaced Yemenis reached more than 18,000 in the first third of this year. According to the organization, 3,000 families have been displaced at least once. Madib witnessed the highest number of displacement cases in the first third of this year, while Taz came in the second place. The United Nations Humanitarian Coordinator for Yemen, David Gressly, warned that the situation in Yemen is very critical, noting that there are people who have lost their ability to secure their needs after 9 years of war. He stressed that 21 million people in Yemen need humanitarian aid, including food, in addition to the needs of the children. He added that the health systems stopped working, especially in remote areas, pointing out that there are millions of displaced people who live in very difficult conditions. The Houthi militia is mobilizing children in summer camps, and they are changing the way they think. This report has more details.
The Houthis have begun annual summer camps in Yemen's regions under the movement's control, urging parents to allow their children to travel to the locations for their education. Critics of the Iran-backed Houthis argue that the main goals of the camps are to brainwash and enlist Yemeni youngsters. Houthi officials have initiated summer programs in schools and other locations, from Hodeidah in the west to the capital Sana'a, along with other areas. Children as young as 10 have been standing in lines to receive instruction in religious teachings and identity from Houthis. The movement says it intends to attract more than 1 million to its camps. Yemeni journalists, activists, and human rights groups have expressed outrage at the calls to join the camps, arguing that the Houthis use them to brainwash children and provide them with military training prior to fighting government forces. Footage has been posted of a Houthi instructor showing youngsters how to use an AK-47 assault rifle. A Yemeni journalist said that the Houthi summer programs brainwashed children with radical ideologies and that camps were a threat to families and communities. In the Houthi summer camps, the objective is to transform the Yemeni children from free-thinking individuals with human values into a mindless mob, propelled by violent and terroristic thought that poses a threat to society and families. The camps are reported to teach children to revere healthy leaders and despise the Yemeni government. A Yemeni media activist who spent 5 years in healthy detention urged parents not to respond to appeals to enroll their children. He said, "Be aware, parents of the target groups and all Yemenis, that the Houthi militia is constantly working to impose its foreign ideas on Yemeni society and to use it as a cultural and doctrinal reference." Undersecretary of the Ministry of Justice warned parents against sending their children to Houthi camps, adding that they may be murdered fighting on the battlefield as a result. He said on Twitter, "You are making an enemy for yourself and Yemen as a whole. Save your children before you can get them back." Hundreds of Yemeni children have been recruited into Houthi summer camps and receiving military training, particularly in Sana'a and Hodeidah governorates, using children as combatants.
Coming next in the news. New report reveals that Yemen among 4 countries face severe food insecurity. Welcome back. Many employees staged a protest in Taz against the suspension of their salaries. They demanded the corrupt be held accountable after the citizens were deprived of local and international humanitarian relief support.
We have staged this protest to call upon the Ministry of Social Affairs to stop corruption in the distribution of the humanitarian aids. There are displaced people who haven't received any aid since the beginning of the war. There are journalists who fled from Houthis and have not received any aid. We call upon the authorities to give us our humanitarian aid. There are people who are deprived from the aid and they didn't receive anything for a long time. The humanitarian cell should look with mercy upon Taiz, which is placed under Houthi blockade and suffers from hunger and poverty, especially among employees. They do not even have the minimum of living.
A recent report by the World Food Programme showed that 6 million people were projected to be one step away from famine in Yemen. The program received only 17% of its needs to finance aid for the next 6 months, and it stated that 3.5 million people were estimated to suffer from acute malnutrition. This report has more details.
The Food Security Information Network has stated that Yemen and 4 other countries represent 40% of countries facing acute food insecurity. The total number of people experiencing or facing high levels of acute food insecurity classified as crisis or worse. The statement added that the number of people experiencing acute food insecurity and requiring urgent food, nutrition, and livelihood assistance increased for the 4th consecutive year in 2022, with over 250 million facing acute hunger and people in 7 countries on the brink of starvation, according to the latest global report on food crises. The report finds that Around 258 million people in 58 countries and territories faced acute food insecurity at crisis or worse levels in 2022, up from 193 million people in 53 countries and territories in 2021. This is the highest number in the 7-year history of the report. However, much of this growth reflects an increase in the population analyzed. Additionally, in 30 of the 42 main food crisis contexts analyzed in the report, over 35 million children under 5 years of age suffered from wasting or acute malnutrition, with 9.2 million of them with severe wasting, the most life-threatening form of undernutrition and a major contributor to increased child mortality. 17 million people in Yemen are in need of food assistance. A growing proportion of the population is dealing with hunger emergencies, while 2 million children across Yemen suffer from acute malnutrition. Yemen came on top of the countries in the world facing the most serious consequences of rising prices as a result of the war that it witnesses for 9 years in a row, after the war was ignited by the Houthi militia. While conflicts and extreme weather events continue to drive acute food insecurity and malnutrition, the economic fallout of the COVID-19 pandemic and the ripple effects of the war in Ukraine have also become major drivers of hunger, particularly in the world's poorest countries, mainly due to their high dependency on imports of food and agricultural inputs and vulnerability to global food price shocks.
The Houthi militia prevented dozens of trailers from reaching the loading sites at Safer domestic gas station in Ma'rib. The Houthi militia controls the payment of domestic gas cylinders, and from time to time the militia fabricates a material crisis in order to make a way for black markets that generate large sums of money for them. The General Electricity Corporation of Aden called on the PLC to intervene to secure fuel for power stations. The corporation confirmed that the generation stations began to reduce generation to the minimum level after the fuel amounts of diesel finished. The health authorities recorded more than 9,000 cases of malaria and dengue fever in Taz from the beginning of the year. The health office of Taz added it recorded 6,000 cases of malaria in Taz. 3,000 of them are confirmed cases. The Director General of Antiquities in Taz visited the archaeological areas affected by torrential rains in the governorate. The visit included the Cairo Castle and the National Museum, where the delegation was briefed on the level of damage to archaeological sites as a result of the rains and torrential rains that the governorate recently witnessed. In the visit, the delegation confirmed that the Antiquities and Museum of Taz are in real danger due to rains, calling for rapid intervention to save this heritage, as it represents a national and historical heritage for Taz and Yemen as a whole. Here's a reminder of the main headlines. U.S. National Security Advisor and Saudi Crown Prince discuss latest peace efforts in Yemen. China's diplomatic breakthrough in the region could broker peace in Yemen. Houthis launch summer camps amid warnings of international and local human rights groups. This is the end of the news. Thank you for watching.